Now, it's a lot harder trying to gauge with cooking on these kinds of.
You get used to it. So, like, what happens is you'll be working on cooking on the fire for a while, and you just kind of get used to what you need to do. So sometimes you'll move it up higher, sometimes lower. So this is...
and so the higher and lower, that determines how hot or how not so hot.
Right. And also how quickly you are... Look at that.
Okay.
Oh, that's beaut.
Beaut.
I love my venison.
Now, the question of historical accuracy and cutting knives.
Yes.
Are you using a historically accurate cutting knife?
So, the knives that they had would have actually been very similar to this. This is not historically accurate to the 14th century. It is historically accurate to the 17th century. This is actually an Amish-made knife, and it's done the same way that they did it, and still do it, in fact, which is nice because you get a good cut. It does not hold its sharpness as long as the blades of today, as modern blades, but it will, it's easier to sharpen than today's blades because it has no serrations at all on it. And so you can sharpen it infinitely, basically.
Oh, great. So earlier time periods, it would have been a lot harder to maintain that blade?
Yes and no. I mean, when you think about it, it's just a matter of every day you sit down and you run the sharpening stone over it.
Okay.
So when you're used to doing that, it's just not an issue. And I think that's a lot of, when we talk about ancient skills, people are like, well, wouldn't that be difficult? Well, no, because if you're doing it every day, it really isn't an issue. You just get used to doing it. It's just what you do. They probably would have found logging onto the internet rather strange. But we do it trivially, so.
Yep, that is true. That is true.
It's a matter of what you're repeating on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So, modern ovens, definitely less complicated. And nowadays, keeping the sharpness is a lot easier. Would sanitation have been a lot harder?
Yes. So, the first thing is they didn't know what germs were. That germ theory didn't happen until, Louis Pasteur, so 1800s? Almost the 1900s, so you had no concept. But they did know, eating raw meat makes me sick, so we should cook that. So the knowledge was there even if they didn't have the theories down pat. Oh, look at that meat. It's beautiful. So they knew they had to clean things, and they knew, for instance, bad water would make you sick, certain things would give you worms, but they didn't have necessarily all the details. So, for instance, if you asked somebody in the Middle Ages about meat, they would tell you that meat produces maggots, because they had observed that. If you leave meat on the counter and nobody touches it, eventually maggots come out of it. You can observe this. It's repeatable. It happens all the time. It is science.
It is science.
Even though we now know that it's caused from fly larvae and stuff, that wasn't something they could see, and so they didn't understand.
Yeah.
But they understood the illness part.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons, and this is an opinion, this is not a historical fact, one of my reasons that I think that they boiled things and made a lot of soups and stews is because you can cook meat for a long time doing that, and so having it overcooked really doesn't apply, and so you know it's cooked. So if it's got any parasites in it, they die, and you don't get sick. So if you know that boiling your food for a really long time means that you don't get sick, it's a repeatable happiness.
Yeah. So overcooked was pretty common for that time.
So, again, it depends on what you're talking about, but for the most part, a lot of the everyday cooking, you're looking at pottages. So things would go into liquid to be cooked. And they would take the food out. It wasn't like today you make a stew, everything's jumbled in together, you put in some thickener, and now you've got a stew, and you pour that over your potatoes or your noodles or whatever. Back then, it was loose because they didn't have roux. Roux wasn't invented until the 16th century. So what you did was you pulled out all of the things from the stew and you put them on a plate and people served themselves. That liquid was used the next day to make porridge or start a soup or whatever else. It wasn't wasted, but it wasn't necessarily eaten. Sorry. So we're gonna take this and just put it in the fry pan. Venison could have been cooked directly on a rack, just like you would with beef today, and do grilling. But I like cooking it with butter, so I am going to pop some butter in the pan and throw it in. Oh.
Now, back then, would they have made butter differently than they make today?
Well, they didn't use machines, but the process is basically the same. You agitate your heavy cream until you end up with butter and buttermilk.
And they would have used more of the rest of the animal rather than...
So, you used everything. Tongue to tail was the terminology that we use. And I do tend to, so the hide for this is getting turned into a rug for my tent. This guy did not have antlers. I don't know if he had shed them or what, but he did not have antlers when we took him. But if he had, it would have been used for something. The forelegs are being used to make knife handles, and the scapula was turned into a scraper for cleaning the hide, and I have various other bones that are going to friends for jewelry and for making needles and all sorts of other cool things. Some more little fiddly pieces here.
And this would be exactly what they would have used in the 14th century
Pretty
for
much.
equipment.
The other thing they might have had is there are fry pans that hang like that, and griddles that hang like that. So rather than putting a pan on top of a grill plate, they would have used straight over the fire like a pan that hung. I don't have one of those, and Mr. Caton's lovely pan here does the job, so that's how I'm doing it today. So basically what we're doing is they've been cooking the stew over on this side, and so they wanted to heat along that side, and then you just keep turning and stirring so that it heats the whole thing. But now I want heat over here, so I'm pulling the fire over by putting the logs in that way. And it just extends the fire underneath my fry pan where I'm cooking, so. But one of the reasons we make a rectangular pit is because we can do this. So we have the boiling section or the grilling section where you want the direct heat. But then over to the side, you can pull the coals underneath a pot to do baking, or you can have it at the side for simmering and such. And it allows you to cook different things at different speeds, and also cook several things at a time, so your food all comes out at the same time, in theory. I think I'm starting to get some decent... Get a little bit of heat. A little bit. Yeah, start. More heat.
What were common spices that they used at the time?
They used salt, pepper. They used cubebs, which they're a type of pepper, but they have no heat. So it has all of the flavor of a black pepper without any spicing to it. Cinnamon, galangal, nutmeg, cloves, grains of paradise, nigella. Both of those are kind of nutty flavored, and you can use them in different ways. And they use blends. So in the 14th century in England at ports, they had a thriving spice business, because you have to remember that the end of the Asian spice trade ended in France, which was a short boat ride across from England. And so tons of spices were coming in. Even people who were, city workers or, the equivalent of factory workers, lower class but not peasants, could afford to buy some spice. You might even be able to pick up saffron, maybe only a few threads, because it was so expensive, but you could get that. It was available. And that was the first time in history that it was that available, which was really cool. And so they had you look at an average American spice cupboard, and there's salt, pepper, paprika, maybe some cloves and cinnamon for those days you make French toast and pancakes. But there's not a lot of spices. We lost a lot when we moved to America, because the spices that were okay making the cross from France to England didn't do so well making the travel from England all the way to America. And so nobody was willing to put that many thousands of dollars worth of spice or gold on a ship that might not make it where it was going. And so you got salt and pepper. Because those were the important ones. So venison is one of those fun things. I am starting to learn how to cook venison better. Other than just, throwing it in a pan with butter.
It's very tricky.
Which is, nice. It's not that it's tricky, but there's this moment between done properly and overcooked.
Yes.
And it's like a 3-minute window. When I'm at home and I have a big roast, I use a thermometer because it's the easiest way to tell. You just jam it in. Modern tools are wonderful. When you don't have that, you have to kind of by color and by how it jiggles when you poke it. And so you just work your way through and you learn. I'm still learning, but the perfect temperature for venison is 155. That takes it to medium, which is about what you should do. Venison, because it's a wild animal, should be cooked a little bit more than steak. You don't want to eat it really rare, because they can harbor pests that we may not know about, and that you can't necessarily see, which cooking overdoes. And this is why cooks have no hair on their fingers, because it all burns off. And when you get home on a Sunday after fair and you look at your hands and you go, why are my hands the only thing sunburned?
Make good tacos too, ground it up.
Okay. And that'll just cook for a minute and then I'll switch out. So if you wanted to do a long cook on that, you could add in water and let it simmer down until it turns into kind of gravy in the bottom and serve it that way with some bread. I'm just going to cook this up and hand it out to the guys as finger food, so I'm not putzing with the fancy stuff. Occasionally I do that, but not right now.
Yeah, I was helping them a bit down with the SCA too.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. So technically, who's doing my job? Jesus.
Here we have
Perfect.
freshly made venison.
You can have a taste. I know you. You won't sue us, so you can have some.
Well, I do not ever say no to food.